Alright, what's good y'all? Soul here, and welcome back to my story mode. So, once upon a time, I did make a video talking about the fact that Pokemon doesn't really have stakes anymore, or at the very least, they really haven't throughout this last, couple generations of the series. Once upon a time, throughout most of Pokemon's lifetime, we had actual threats, something that, if not solved as soon as humanly possible, would threaten the entire world of Pokemon as we knew it. We had villains that were actually really kinda scary and felt really urgent to deal with. Yeah, sure, when we were younger, our primary mindset was just getting as strong as possible to take on the Elite Four and become the champion that we already knew that we were at heart. However, another part of that was getting strong enough to take down the actual genuine criminal organizations that were plotting to either destroy or completely ruin the world of Pokemon. Back then, we had things that were a threat to the world of Pokemon, things that made our journeys just a tad more dangerous, and they made stories for Pokemon just a little bit more intriguing. One of the more important things to me for a lot of written works is to have an actual antagonist that really kicks things into high gear, makes things a lot more urgent for our heroes or for our protagonists at the very least to have something to deal with throughout that story. As you could probably see from the title and the thumbnail, and have probably guessed from my last minute or so of yapping, Pokemon has been kind of lacking in that arena lately. I think a lot of us can agree that these last couple of generations, we have been sorely lacking in that arena, a component that I don't think that the Pokemon franchise should ever lose. And so, with that, I believe we have set up our prompt for today's video. I think that villains in Pokemon, or at least in modern Pokemon, need some serious reworking. The drill is something you good and well know by now. Why don't you go ahead, get comfy, maybe grab yourself a little bit of a snack, maybe a banana, and you can smother that in some cream cheese, and let's go ahead and talk about how villains could use some work in modern Pokemon. So why don't we go ahead and start by addressing the current issue? And I think it's safe to say that the current issue is that we haven't had an actual villain since 7th gen. As of 2 years ago, that means it will have been 10 years since we've had a true, genuine villain, or at least something that feels like an actual villain. Now, of course, this is completely opinionated. How you feel about the last couple of Pokemon games in terms of how villains work is completely up to you. I'm not calling you wrong. However, in my personal opinion, it feels like Lusamine was the last actual, genuine, serious villain that we've had in Pokemon in a very long time. Now, please forgive me when I say this, but it has been a very long time since I've played Pokemon Sun and Moon, so I did have to do a little bit of Googling and Redditing to actually, kind of remind myself of what kind of character Lusamine was, and I still stand by my point that she was actually an incredible villain because she was so tragic as a villain. And it was really compelling as a story. This woman essentially, because of their research, lost her husband to ultra wormholes and wanted to do everything in her power to get him back, and in turn became very, very upset, confused, and overall probably really angry with even the concept of ultra beasts. Her research trying to get her husband back ultimately led her to Nihilego, which in turn ended up manipulating her because of its neurotoxins. It warped her mindset deeply, and of course, because it affected and heightened her emotions, it kind of led her down a very dark path. How she treated her children, for one, how she treated the Pokemon that she ended up freezing to preserve their beauty, and things along those lines, and how she inevitably, above all else, prioritized Ultra Beasts. And of course, Gladio and Lily had no idea what was happening with their mother. They just knew that she did not used to be like this. She used to be a very caring woman, somebody who cared about her family and her husband above all else. So this was very strange to them, and it made for something really interesting as a concept. What really got me though with 7th gen is the fact that they tried to trick us into thinking that Team Skull was actually the primary bad guys in this plot, when in turn, it never truly was. It was always the Aether Foundation. And because of that, we actually got to know Guzma quite well, and in fact, got a good redemption arc out of bro. Taking that look back made me really appreciate what 7th gen gave us. I don't think that it's perfect by any means. It still definitely has its flaws here and there, but for what it is, it had a very solid story that I can really appreciate. And now, here we are, damn near 8 years later, and we don't have anything even remotely like that anymore. Now, obviously, I'm not gonna count the remakes because they're remakes. They already had a pre-established plotline, a pre-established villain, and we already knew everything about them from region to story through and through by the time that they came out. So obviously, no, I'm not gonna count Let's Go or Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which means that we jump right to Generation 8. Now, here's the thing, right? Technically, we do have a villain. Chairman Rose is the antagonist of Pokemon Sword and Shield. The problem with Chairman Rose is that he had proven himself throughout the course of the game to be obvious, to be incompetent, and to be extremely boring as a villain because his intentions don't make any sense. What I liked about previous villains in the Pokemon franchise is that throughout the course of the game, they would either be transforming right in front of your eyes, becoming more and more evil as the story progresses, or they would be obviously evil right from the get-go, but continuously cause problems that eventually spiral into a much deeper problem that cannot be even remotely ignored anymore. With Rose, while it was very obvious what he was up to, he was basically absent through a majority of the game. He just essentially wanted to harness the power of the stars and distribute that properly throughout Galar so that within the next 1,000 years it didn't blow out of proportion and go out of control. Leon, somebody much younger than him and much more experienced with that power and with Pokemon, literally told him, hey, you know, maybe A, we can deal with this later, B, definitely find a better way to handle it. And obviously he just went ahead and did his own thing anyway. It just so happened to be when we were well more than strong enough to properly deal with him right at the ass end of the game. There was nothing gradual or subtle about what he was doing or how he developed. It was instant. He was instantly insane. What? I get wanting to handle a problem before it becomes an actual problem, but making it a problem as soon as humanly possible for the people of today instead of properly taking all of the time in the world throughout the lifetime that you have to properly figure out how to handle the situation is by and far the dumbest reason I have ever seen for a villain in Pokemon. Him and Oleana probably had a lot more interesting character and development within the story that was supposed to be present. However, we really didn't get to see that. Everything interesting about them was in the background. The Pokemon Twilight Wings episode, where we got to see how the relationship between Rose and Oleana developed, was actually really sweet. I enjoyed it a lot. But A, it barely helps Rose as a character. It actually more so focuses on Oleana, if anything. And B, it suffers from the exact same problem that a majority of the Pokemon games have suffered, and that's that any important characterization is placed in completely separate media. I can tell you for a fact that a majority of my friends, who do very much enjoy Pokemon by the way, even if I tried to introduce it to them, have not even seen Twilight Wings. They don't care enough to go out of their way to learn about somebody like Rose or Oleana. They just didn't. So in turn, they're left with the exact same mindset that a lot of other people had when it came to the story of Pokemon Sword and Shield, and that is that there basically was no real story going on. And again, I say that dramatically. There obviously was a story happening, it was just so lackluster that it is, for lack of a better term here, kind of a big nothing burger. Simply put, it was just infuriatingly underwhelming. Which really sucks for Pokemon's first new generational debut on a home console. It also doesn't really help that a lot of the other stuff that we were promised never came to be, but you know what? We're talking about something completely different today. Let's not even get into that. Actually, let's just go ahead and move on entirely to Pokemon Legends, another game which was completely lacking an antagonist. But Soul, what in the world are you rambling on about? Volo is literally right there. Not only was he an antagonist and very much evil, but he literally kicked our asses at the end of Pokemon Legends Arceus. What in the world are you yammering about? Yeah, see, that's just kinda it though. Yeah, he had ulterior motives throughout the entirety of the main game, but we only talked to Volo throughout the game like maybe 4 or 5 times, only to find him at the end of the post-game with ulterior motives. Bro was not part of the main plot whatsoever. Volo had jack squat to do with the out-of-control Pokemon. he also had jack squat to do with anything that was happening on Mount Coronet. Yeah, he was kind of a neat plot twist, but the problem is, he wasn't even part of the primary plot whatsoever. And so, in that sense, we're left with who? Kamado? I don't know if I would count him as an antagonist. And I don't know, maybe this could be considered solid writing, because I personally believe, probably much like a lot of you, that he was completely justified in trying to take us down, because in his point of view, we were the anomaly. And even if we were working with him the entire game, there was nothing getting fixed about what was happening, again, above Mount Coronet. So, it clearly made sense for him to take matters into his own hands and be like, look, no bad blood against you, G, but when you came out of that portal, everything started going to hell. So, sorry, you're the only common denominator here, and you gotta go. I gotta protect mine. Okay, cool, fair enough. I mean, we still ended up whooping his ass anyway, and he wasn't even the primary threat, but, you know, it doesn't not make sense that he did what he did. But I don't know, I feel like there's gotta be more to it than that to be an antagonist, right? I mean, I don't know, there could be so much more going on with the plot of Pokemon Legends Arceus in general, but regardless, that leaves us with who? Arceus, maybe? It took us from our own time, dragged us into this completely unexplained period of time where things are going to hell, expected to fix everything, and once we do fix everything, only then do we finally meet God again, who challenges us to fight, we capture it, and now we're stuck in this timeline? That's probably about as evil as you can get without, you know, actually saying it, but the thing is, not really an antagonist because nobody besides you even know Arceus exists. I don't know. I feel like in Pokemon Legends Arceus, I feel like I'm crazy. Like, I love the game, please don't get me wrong, it was very fun. The story just had nothing to offer, and it also doesn't help that we don't really have an actual antagonist whatsoever. So at the heart of it all, when it comes to Pokemon Legends Arceus, it's kind of a complete empty bag. Just nothing going on in terms of story and villainy. It's just stuff kind of happens, and it's our job to fix it, I guess. Whatever. Now, of course, we move on to the big meat, which is Generation 9, and I'm only talking about the main plot of the original story, not referring to the DLC at all. And clearly, as we've experienced, we don't really have an antagonist in Generation 9. Now, you could count Team Star as the antagonist, but it's kind of a weird situation in which if you just left them alone, if they just were completely left to their own devices, they weren't really hurting anybody. At worst, they scared a couple of students away. They weren't really much of a threat. It'd be one thing if they were solely beating up on people in Pokemon for the sport of it or something like that, but that wasn't the case. It was simply a group of misunderstood and bullied kids that banded together to protect their own. Now, again, there's a lot of different ways that you can write antagonists, and this absolutely could work as an antagonist, you know, situation. But again, I'm not feeling the threat from them. I'm not feeling like the urgency to, you know, to pummel them like like I did when I was playing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I wasn't like, oh man, I need to take down Team Star. Like, no, I didn't feel good doing that at all. Which then just brings us to the Professor's Robot, an AI failsafe program developed because the professors realized that their research got a little overzealous, and so they put that in to make sure that the research wasn't disturbed. But even then, the AI clearly grew some kind of a conscience and was like, hey, what up? You need to stop me, and we need to close this portal. Like, you know, no big deal. And by technicality, yeah, the world was kind of in danger because eventually this portal would grow big enough to let in all of the Paradox Pokemon and basically merge past and future with the present. But the problem here is that we wouldn't have even known that had we never gone to Area Zero, and we never would have known of any malicious intent had the AI professor's failsafe not kicked in. We did not know of any malicious intent until the battle started, actually. So you get what I'm getting at here? Until the very end, once again, we didn't know of any looming threat. Which, at the very least, this time, I'll give credit where credit is due, is satiated by the fact that we had actual stories between Penny, Arvin, and Nimona. And I still generally have fun playing the game, it's an absolutely good time, but the fact that it's just completely missing a real antagonist is just so strange to me. Why is it? that the biggest Pokemon games that we've ever had up to this point don't have real villains anymore. Now, it is 100% okay to disagree with me if you feel like any of the characters that I talked about act as fine enough villains for you. But in my personal opinion, when you compare them to the likes of Giovanni, Cyrus, Getsis, do we really feel like these guys can step up to that at all? In terms of writing, by the way, not battle power. That's a completely different discussion. But you get what I'm getting at, right? At the risk of sounding a little redundant here, we have lost real threats in the Pokemon world. And I just gotta ask, what is the reason for this? My first guess would obviously be that because they were focusing on designing these massive worlds and they only had so much time to bring these worlds to life, that they could only dedicate so much time to doing villains the way that they used to. But I don't know, that in of itself doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, we could debate about that for Pokemon Sword and Shield and maybe Pokemon Legends Arceus, but not really Scarlet and Violet. If that were actually the case for Generation 9, we probably wouldn't have multiple storylines in that game. So I don't think that that in of itself is actually the case. So what is? Another reason that did come to mind as an idea, and I know this is kind of ridiculous, but maybe because of the influx of new players, children, and the like, they didn't want to go around introducing quote-unquote evil characters that might influence younger minds. And trust me, I rolled my eyes even writing out the note to talk about this topic, because if that is the case, it's absolutely ridiculous. If this were the case, this would be really stupid, because it falls under the, oh, video games are violent, so children shouldn't be playing them because it influences them to become violent. Obviously, I and plenty of other peoples that play video games know that that's stupid, because if that was the case, then go ahead and take away anything in media that has a villain, any fiction out there that has villainy. You're telling me that those two kids in middle school got in a fight because one of them was inspired by Ozai from Avatar: The Last Airbender? I don't think so, man. Kids are not prone to misbehave if you have a very, good written villain put in front of them. That's not how things work. You didn't see us robbing banks and breaking into people's houses because we were inspired by Team Rocket. So I don't know, but I do feel like that could be a possibility considering how they've gone about making teams lately, like Team Yell or Team Star. These aren't necessarily evil teams, they're just kind of there. And when you compare them to teams of our past, like Team Plasma, Team Galactic, Team Aqua and Magma even, they don't even hold a candle, because again, they're not like malicious teams that are hell-bent on getting what they want by doing that however they possibly can. So as far as reason goes, I can't really think of anything else that's even remotely close to concrete besides that one, and even that one is probably a stretch. So here we are, 2 full generations later, and I don't know about you, but I personally feel like we have been lacking in that villain department very heavily. So what do we do now? Where do we go from here? Well, I guess my most obvious solution is to use actual villains, or at the very least, have an antagonistic force that morally opposes us a little bit. Here's the thing, like I mentioned earlier, having an actual villain in a series, whether it be a book, a movie, a show, or especially video games, rarely has the overwhelming consequences that the 1 or 2 dramatic parents out there think that it might have. Having actual villains, or at the very least morally corrupt characters, has helped me learn and grow as a person. It's really made me pay attention to things like perspective, empathy, and how to see things from the other side through well-written villains. 9 times out of 10, as long as the villain isn't evil just for the sake of being evil, then I feel like we can have some really interesting stories on our hands. Of course, it's ironic when you bring that up and then you look at a character like Giovanni who's exactly that, but the thing about Giovanni is that he was the villain at the very start of the series. This was back during a time where stories were a lot more simple. You, the obvious good guy, were facing off against the obvious bad guy. And that was all it needed to be. Sometimes people are just very selfish and simply need to be stopped as soon as humanly possible, like a sick man like Giovanni. But the series has progressed a long way, and we, the players, have grown up a lot. So in turn, it has grown so much in size in terms of its world and its storytelling. And so by proxy, the size of its stories, themes, and messages have grown as well. So I think that it's safe to say that now more than ever, these stories could definitely use an antagonistic force that is a little more than just, pure evil for the sake of being evil. I'm looking for villains that truly don't believe that what they're doing is wrong. I'm looking for characters that make us question our morals and how we feel about Pokemon. These worlds are getting massive, these stories are getting deeper, and I feel like with a true antagonistic force that makes us really question what we're doing as the player, we could be on the cusp of something truly incredible in terms of narrative when it comes to Pokemon. For the sake of being insane, I would just love to see what the Thanos or the Sephiroth of the Pokemon world would look like. In the case of Thanos, a character that truly believes that half the world's Pokemon don't need to be there and he wants to balance things out a little bit. Or in the case of a Sephiroth-like character, somebody who's been, for lack of a better way to put this, somebody who's been brainwashed into becoming something of a god because of the teachings of whoever they've been learning from growing up, or from maybe a parental figure or something of that sort. Something that drove them insane over time. Of course, not like Pokemon hasn't done very similar things in the past. Again, I just mentioned Lusamine at the beginning of this video. But I really want to see them let loose and go all out on the narrative of an antagonistic force, because I think that would drive the story somewhere absolutely insane. And I would love to go off the deep end with that. But hey, you know what? Maybe that's just me. So that just about does it for this one. I guess all in all, I'm really hoping that we get a real villain going forward, and especially in Pokemon Legends ZA. I really do hope that we do see a genuine villain, whether it be ZA, or I'm sorry, AZ or somebody else. Don't really care how it has to happen. I just want to see like a real villain. Maybe a Pokemon, right? Maybe somebody like Mewtwo, who's, been kind of maybe manipulating the player into doing their bidding, only to find out they've been betraying them and manipulating them the entire time. We could do something absolutely crazy. Doesn't even need to be a person. It could be a Pokemon too. But I don't know. I feel like there's just so many things and just so much potential with this series that they could literally go anywhere with it, and I would be down to just hop on that ride for it. But I guess we'll have to play that one by ear. So with all that being said, obviously I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to you guys, and I want you guys to tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below. Do you think that Pokemon could use real villains again? Do you think that the lackluster villains that we've been getting in these recent games have been really frustrating, and you're kind of like me where you would want to see a real improvement in that arena? Or do you think that the stories that we've been getting are perfectly fine? We don't really need an antagonistic force. I couldn't say that for the life of me. That could really drive the story, that we don't really need that because we already have other forces that drive the story perfectly fine. Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I am always going to be down there with you guys. But with that, yep, it does appear to be skedaddle o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and do just that. I would like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Do me the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm gone. So thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor, taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time.